I were Cuomo and I were looking at this, I'd say, look, I was leading in the polls before I blew it. However,
but please give me another chance.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Tuesday, July 15th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and joining me are Real Clear Politics president and co-founder Tom Gavin and Washington Bureau Chief Karrin. Well, guys, Andrew Cuomo is still running for mayor after losing the Democratic primary. He announced yesterday that he's staying in the race as an independent. So, Tom, what does this decision mean for this race this fall?
I don't know. I think Mamdani still has to be the favorite. I mean, honestly. And Cuomo, you know, he released this video. It looked like it was taken on a cell phone. He's in the park and he's, you know, sort of apologized to his supporters.
It's an homage to Mamdani's videos.
It was terrible. I mean, honestly, he apologized to his supporters and then he said, you know, well, you know, only 11% of New Yorkers voted. And so we're going to, you know, and we need to address the affordability crisis, but we need a mayor who has the guts to stand up to people in the experience. I mean, it was bad. I mean, I don't know that him staying in this race now, you know, I know he's gotten some endorsements and he thinks that he's going to somehow win the day and that New York is going to come to their senses and they will shun this socialist, communist guy who has risen sort of, you know, like a meteor, but I just don't know that it's going to happen. And if it were to happen, I just don't know that it would happen behind a guy like Cuomo, who is, yes, he's got the name recognition, but he just seems thoroughly uninspiring. And so maybe it's going to be left up to Eric Adams to get it done, but I don't know if he can do it either. So I just don't know that Andrew Cuomo is the answer to the question that is plaguing the city of New York right now.
Carl, what do you think?
Well, you have these three candidates. Eric Adams, who'd already decided to run as an independent. I think he made a judgment a year ago he couldn't win a Democratic primary. And Curtis Sliwa, who's the Guardian Angels founder, he's running the Republican ticket. All of them seem to think that they could beat Mamdani one-on-one. Now, there's no evidence for that, but that's what they seem to think. And what they point to is polls show he's got about 40% of the vote, which means about 60% of New Yorkers want somebody else. But if, you know, all that vote wouldn't automatically go to one of these three people, I agree with Tom. Mamdani's the front runner, no question. But the question is which one of these guys should get out. And you know, Cuomo's case is, look, I was governor. I can raise all this money. He's a proven
I killed
juggernaut.
all those people in nursing homes.
Yeah, he doesn't talk about that or the sexual harassment beef that drove him from office. He doesn't talk about those things, Tom. But to me, Adams has a cleaner argument, which is I'm the mayor.
I took
already.
gold bars from Turkey.
No, that was another guy, Tom. You get him confused with Menendez.
Oh, sorry.
He upgraded hotel rooms and flights.
He's
a hubcap thief compared to Menendez.
Got some business class flights in hotels.
Yeah, he's a hubcap thief. But he's got this thing with Trump and sanctuary cities. I'm not saying it's a perfect narrative, but my point is that he's saying I'm the incumbent. I'd already decided to run as an independent. And to Cuomo, he says, and you already lost to this guy. He beat you. He's never beat me. So I think Adams' rap is a little easier to understand, and then Cuomo counters that. But I lean you in the polls. So
yeah, I know. I was going to say. Right? So there is this poll. It's by Slingshot Strategies, which is a Democratic pollster, I guess. But Tom, Mamdani's at 35%. Cuomo's is second at 25%. Sliwa at 14%. He's the Republican nominee, I guess. Adams 11%. So I think that if I were Cuomo and I were looking at this, I'd say, look, I was leading in the Democratic polls before I blew it. True. However,
but please give me another chance.
Give me another chance. And I'm the number 2 guy right now. Get these guys out of the race and let me take this guy one-on-one. I'll do better this time around. I don't know. It seems to me as compelling in his argument as any other candidate would have.
Right. And that's the conundrum is that, you know, I mean, I think both candidates think that if Sliwa were to get out, that they'd get all those Republican votes that you know,
it's 200, most of them.
200 Republicans who live in Manhattan are not going to vote for a communist. But they really need to win over right, centrist Democrats. And I don't know how many of those there are in the city of New York. But yeah, look, that's Cuomo's argument. And Adams is tainted. These guys are flawed candidates, all of them. And they have just absolutely cleared the way for Mamdani to become the next mayor of New York. And if that happens,
can I throw out an idea to you guys?
I said on Megyn Kelly's show, I said, Anthony Weiner should
go ahead.
That Donald Trump gets involved by putting Eric Adams in the government and giving him a federal job, giving him something he can stay place.
I see. Gives him an exit ramp. I see.
Right. I'm throwing this idea out there because I assume it's occurred to somebody in the administration. I haven't heard a whisper of it yet, but give him something. And then he's free to step down and say, okay, I've got to do this other job. It's very important.
In the Department of he could work in the Department of Transportation, working on those plane reservations and hotel reservations.
He's a police official. You give him a job in law enforcement.
Maybe he could go to the Department of Education because they're going to need some people there. The Supreme Court granted the Trump administration's request to pause this order by a federal judge to reinstate these 1,400 employees that they decided to cut. Tom, that looks like it may be paving the way to eliminate or at least severely cut back the agency. It's another example of the Supreme Court reining in a lower court judge who's trying to block Trump. Is this a victory for the White House? And doesn't mean we're one step closer to no more Department of Education.
I think so, yeah. I mean, this was a victory for the administration. And look, this would be, we talked about this during the campaign and maybe a little bit after when the announcement was made that, Republicans have talked about doing away with the Department of Education since it came into existence back in 1980. And nobody's ever been able to do it. It's just been sort of a talking point. And here comes Trump. This would be another huge, promise made, promise delivered for, his base and for Republicans in general. I mean, this has been part of most Republicans have talked about this. So this would be a huge deal if he actually gets this done. And he's one step closer to actually doing it right now.
So, Carl, I mean, most of us thought that it could not be shut down except by an act of Congress.
Well,
I guess you can shrink it down and put it in the bathtub and drown it, right?
That's right.
That's Grover Norquist's
Linda McMahon will be standing there by herself.
Grover Norquist's famous formulation. Well, Andy, it was created. There was a Department of Education. I think it was called the Office of Education, and I think it was formed literally during Reconstruction. My guess, my memory is that President Andrew Johnson, the president who succeeded Abraham Lincoln, signed it in office. For decades, it mostly just gathered information.
When Jimmy Carter, HEW, I mean, people forget when
Jimmy Carter, it was out of it. When Jimmy Carter ran for president, he promised the teachers union this was something that they wanted to make it a cabinet level office, cabinet level, and Jimmy Carter signed that bill into law in October of 1979. It wasn't really created until the following year. There was a year sunset. By then, Ronald Reagan was already saying he wanted to get rid of it. He was running against Carter. Well, he got rid of Carter, but he didn't, as you said, he didn't get rid of the Department of Education, and he never really tried that hard. Tom points out other Republicans have mentioned this, but it was something you sort of just said. I mean, George W. Bush certainly never said anything of the kind. He actually wanted to bolster it and did so. But Sonia Sotomayor wrote a blistering dissent, 6-3 dissent. These numbers are now becoming familiar, and she said, the job of the judiciary is to rein in the executive when they act unlawfully. This was an act of Congress. Obviously, it was obvious to me the president ought to be able to shrink the federal workforce. If he can't, how can it ever be done? It's the executive branch. And they had buyouts there. 500 or 600 employees took early retirement or buyouts or just quit. Another 13 or 1,400 have been told their jobs are being done away with. That's like 40% of the agency.
There's 4,200. People should know there's about 4,200 employees there.
But the problem
budget is $268 billion. Just to give people a sense.
And most of that's not in salaries to those employees. Most of it goes to the states. But Andy, the point here is that Trump isn't just saying he wants to shrink the workforce. In his executive order, he directs Linda McMahon to close the agency. Mm-hmm. And I still don't understand. We haven't seen the opinion by the majority judges yet. I don't understand how an act of Congress can create an agency and president could just make it go away with a stroke of a pen. And I don't think we've probably heard the last word on this.
Yeah. Well, you're right. I think it's going to come back to the Supreme Court in one form or another. Anyway, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back with more right after these words. Guys, Alan Dershowitz was on News Nation last night explaining his view of the Jeffrey Epstein files. Here is just a little bit of what he had to say.
There is no client list. There never has been a client list. A client list suggests that Jeffrey Epstein made a list of people to whom he trafficked women. What there is a redacted FBI affidavit from accusers. There are several of them. From accusers that accuse that accuse various people of having improper sex. And as far as the suicide is concerned, of course it was a suicide, but it was a suicide, I believe, assisted by jailers. It was not a suicide that he could have committed alone. I think the jailers had something to do with his cellmate being dismissed, with the cameras being turned off. So there are things that can be hidden, but there's no smoking gun here, and there's no fault on the part of this administration, as far as I can tell.
So, Tom,
why are you going to Tom first? I think I'm owed an apology here.
Well, I will ask Tom whether he is now on Team Cannon, saying there's nothing to see here other than maybe a little assist from the prison guards on this guy committing suicide. Other than that, nothing to see here.
Well, listen. So maybe we were a little hard on the old guy yesterday with regard to Epstein, but I will. And listen, I watched this interview, and Alan Dershowitz seems obviously he knows a lot about this case. He was intimately involved. He defended Jeffrey Epstein. He was accused of being one of the people on the list, and basically, screamed at the rooftops and fought that tooth and nail until he was, sort of got his reputation back. But there are things, and so he seemed totally credible, and it seems everything that he laid out seemed pretty convincing to me. But what he did say was this information was being held back by the orders of two judges in Manhattan, and they were doing it on behalf of the accusers, right? They were trying to protect them. That's what and he said, look, these names that are redacted, he said, you can figure out and deduce who they are because of the context of these affidavits. And he said, I know who most of these people are. And he said, I'd love to talk more about this case, but I can't because of those judges. And so, and many of those names, by the way, he said, have been released, have already been made public in articles and books that have been written about this. And so he's like, there's not a lot of new information to be had there. So granting all of that as taking Dershowitz at his word, that I still think the administration has mishandled this. I mean, this was the best defense that I have heard. And why I didn't hear this from a member of the administration, why Pam Bondi or Dan Bongino or the president himself didn't lay this stuff out the way that Dershowitz did on TV last night, speaks to the way that they have mishandled this and not communicated clearly enough and allowed these questions to fester. I still think they should do more. I think they will do more in terms of releasing more information and making it as transparent as possible, redacting whatever they can redact, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, look, what can I say? I'm not going to go so far as to apologize to
you just heard a Washington apology, folks. if I hurt anyone's feelings, mistakes were made.
There's still.
If you misunderstood how wonderful I am,
people are interested in this case for a reason, and the reason is that there's information that's being withheld, and the president and the administration have not done a good job of laying it all out there.
Okay, Carl,
Andy, can you do better, Andy?
Do I have to apologize as well?
I think so. It was 2-1. I was getting my ribs kicked in from both directions yesterday.
Well, I mean, I do think that this idea that there was nothing about the list, but there might be some, the prison guards might be in on the suicide, does lead me to think, okay, well, there's more to this story. We should find out what the heck is going on.
That's the part I said I was. That's the part I said I was curious about.
Right?
That's the part I said I was curious about. Was the death. The list seems to me to be a canard, but I can see you guys aren't man enough to just apologize. So I'll just have to be confident in my own self that me and Dershowitz are on the same page, and I hope he knows what he's talking about.
By the way, the other thing that was really convincing about this interview is he said, there's no evidence that he was an agent, operative for the U.S. or for the Mossad. He said, I defended the guy. He would have told me that. It would have been gold for me. I would have used it in his defense. It would have been huge. And he said that he wasn't. And Dershowitz said that he had later confirmed, with his contacts and sources within the Mossad that Epstein was not an operative for them.
Andy, what was that old book, The Paranoid Style of American Politics?
Yes.
Was that Dick Hofstadter? Anyway, that's really, to me, what's going on. People like a conspiracy. They like a whodunit. They think the government, our brains work that way, but sometimes we just need to, take a deep breath and see what the facts are.
All right. Well, Carl, we did that story so you could feel a little redemption there. But
we felt we owed it to Carl to talk about it again.
I do need to play you this now. This is Gavin Newsom.
This is the other. This
sat down
take
with
it on the
conservative podcaster Sean Ryan, and he was asked about transgender surgery for 8-year-olds, and this is the exchange.
What about for your values? I mean, is 8 years old too young?
Yeah, I mean, look, I now that I have a 9-year-old, just became 9. Come on, man. I get it. So those are legit. It's interesting, just the issue of age. It's interesting. As someone that's been so focused on equality, broadly, LGBT rights, particularly gay marriage. The trans issue for me is also novel. It's over the last few years. I'm trying to understand as much as anyone else. Whole pronoun thing, trying to understand all of that.
So, Carl, I'm still not clear whether he thinks 8-year-olds are too young to have transgender surgery, but
I don't think that surgery was the question. I think transitioning at the beginning of it, but I don't want to quibble. Gavin Newsom was a hero to the gay rights movement. As mayor, he married people before it was legal. He fought the status quo. He actually is one of the few politicians of either party who actually risked political capital on this issue of gay marriage. 20 years later, the territory in the Democratic Party has shifted so radically that now you have to favor men and women's sports and transition for young children, where you're not a member in good standing of the left half of the Democratic Party. And I think Gavin Newsom is struggling the way any rational person would.
Really interesting. Tom, are you struggling with this?
I'm struggling with Gavin Newsom's presidential aspirations the more I listen to him talk and not be able to give straight answers on this. I mean, remember, his podcast when he interviewed Charlie Kirk and he kind of said, can't deal with boys and girls sports. That's a bridge too far. And then the state of California decided to deny and basically tell the Trump administration to go pound sand when they issued this order banning boys from playing in girl sports. And so he flip-flopped on that issue. And here he is, unable to say, and it was painful to watch him. I mean, I've interviewed him before. I've talked to him. He is a very charismatic guy. The camera loves him. He's tall. He is well-spoken, and he gets in front of the camera and he just, he speaks well, and he's able to sort of weave this. If you're not paying attention to what he's actually saying, it all sounds great. But in this context, watching him just sort of going in circles. I mean, we used to get on Kamala Harris for her word salads. I mean, he was doing donuts on the lawn here, couldn't figure out which way to go. When a simple answer of, yes, that's too young, I believe it should be later. He didn't necessarily even have to specify an age. All he had to say was, eight's pretty young. And he couldn't even seem to get that out. So I think he's going to have trouble as he's trying to placate the left on some of these issues, but also hew a little bit to the center and present himself as sort of the rational Democrat for the 2028 run. I'm not saying it's easy, but he's the guy who you would think would have the skill set and the chops to get that done. But in the early going, it's been a little bit hit or miss.
Yeah. Carl, you got 30 seconds. I'll give you that for.
Well, I remember when Ronald Reagan was president and the AIDS crisis hit, and Ronald Reagan was the only president we'd had, because he spent all his time in Hollywood, who actually had close friends who were gay. And he was sort of uniquely positioned to be very sensitive about this. And a lot of people think he missed the moment. I think maybe Newsom's going to have to do better with this issue. He's running for president, and he's going to be asked about this again. My guess is he'll do better next time.
All right. Well, we're gonna leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. Don't go away. Carl and I will be back in a minute with Phil Wegman, our White House reporter, to talk about Ukraine. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl Cannon, and joining us is RCP White House correspondent Phil Wegman. And Phil, you have a piece on the front page of RCP today that explains what you see as the difference between Trump's recently announced arms shipments to Ukraine and those of the Biden administration. So how are they different and how are they the same?
So yesterday in the Oval Office, President Trump is seated next to the NATO General Secretary, and he announces that the United States is going to be arming Ukraine to the teeth, and that if President Putin does not come to the table seriously for peace talks, that there will be sanctions. All of a sudden, a lot of my Biden sources started reaching out and saying, wait a minute, this sounds like our policy with extra steps. And the criticism is a bit fair, because just like President Biden before him, Trump is now going down the road of additional weapons shipments and sanctions. But there's a difference here. And that difference is that the United States is not going to be sending these weapons directly to Ukraine. Instead, NATO is going to serve as an intermediary. There's no blank check. They're the ones buying the weapons from the United States, then transferring them to Ukraine. That's a big Trumpian twist. But overall, when you look at the land war there that's been going on for more than 3 years, the question is, what does this actually change in terms of the quagmire? And then also, what does it change about U.S. involvement in the war? There are certainly some, like Steve Bannon, one of President Trump's, longest allies, who say, wait a minute, this isn't what we were promised with America First. And this is going to further entrench the United States in that war. But as all of this is playing out, it's very similar to the squabble that happened ahead of the strikes on Iran. And what we're seeing right now is that the hawks are ascendant, and some of the anti-interventionists, they're taking a back seat in the current administration.
Well, you can say that it's the same policy as Biden. I think that saying you're laundering it through NATO is a distinction without a difference. I mean, that doesn't really mean much. Maybe gives President a little cover with some of the more vocal elements of the isolationist wing of MAGA. But I think the real point here is that it's the difference between running for office and governing. We don't think of that usually when it comes to Trump in this way, because he was already president for 4 years before. But I remember, when I was first president I covered was Bill Clinton, and he ran for office against George H.W. Bush and said that, he would revisit letting China have most favored nation status, as a trading partner. Well, when he became president, oh, never mind, because you have to govern, and you start to hear from other voices, not just your base, not just even people in your political party, but foreign policy experts and other people like that. I think Trump should be given some running room here. He's president of the United States now. He's not a candidate for president. But the other thing going on, and Phil would know better than I would, but it seems that he has lost patience with Vladimir Putin, that he really doesn't like the guy anymore, doesn't trust him, doesn't think he's dealing in good faith, and doesn't think he wants peace. I think Trump's getting angry at Putin, but that's from a distance. Phil, does that strike you as right?
Yeah, absolutely. And in the Oval Office yesterday, Trump gave us an insight into his negotiations with Putin. He's been on the phone with the guy at least 4 different times, probably more so. Trump said that he thought he was close to a deal 4 different times. And now he says every time he has a conversation, it's warm, but the talk doesn't lead anywhere. There are still strikes on Ukraine. I think that this is a moment where Trump came into office frustrated with Zelensky, frustrated with the Ukrainian side. Certainly there was that blow up in the Oval Office, but now it's Putin who is really the speed bump here towards peace. But I think, Cannon, what you said about the difference between running for office and governing, it reminds me of what former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told us at the Republican National Convention. There was all of this concern about Trump picking an anti-interventionist like J.D. Vance to be his VP. And Pompeo said, if you are a Ukrainian mother, right now you prefer a Trump-Vance ticket over a Biden-Harris one. I don't know if that's, that turns out to be true.
Maybe so, Phil, but they would have preferred even more a Trump-Pompeo ticket.
Certainly. But the second part of what he told me is you will see Vance get to a good place. You will see them get to a good place. And I think that was sort of tacit acknowledgement, at least from one of the more hawkish members of MAGA, that circumstances are going to intervene, and a lot of this campaign talk is going to fall by the wayside.
So when you say that the sort of hawks are ascended in the White House, who are we talking about? Because has Vance switched sides on this? Is he on the hawkish side as well? Or is it, because I always think of it, well, used to think it was sort of like this would fall down to Rubio versus Vance kind of thing. That was sort of like a shorthand way of viewing it. But am I wrong about that? Or how do the forces align inside the White House on this?
So I think that they would obviously object to that shorthand. Vance and Rubio are actually quite close. But in terms of ideology, it's fair. If we go back to that leaked signal chat, it was the vice president who was saying, don't strike the Houthis, let the Europeans take care of the Middle East in their backyard. If we're talking about a spectrum here, you have Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who is probably the most opposed to foreign intervention. J.D. Vance is also there. He's made his opinions known. As we noted in the piece, he was very skeptical when he was a U.S. Senator. He told us at RealClearPolitics that he was concerned about where these weapons shipments were ultimately ending up. Steve Witkoff is also someone who is saying, give diplomacy a chance. But then you have others who do believe in hard power, among them Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. But as I talk to a lot of current and former Trump officials, one thing that they were telling me, some of the former guys were saying, look, Donald Trump does not have a cohesive foreign policy. And previously, he was falling back on the advice of his advisors. Now, he was listening to some of his more dovish advisors, but things have changed since Iran. I think it's true. Things have changed since Iran. But one of my Trump sources, they said, look, don't think of Trump in ideological terms. The best way to understand him on foreign policy is that he has strong opinions loosely held. And certainly this seems to be a case of strong opinions loosely held as he's adapting to Vladimir Putin being the, stick in the mud and moving in a more pro-Ukrainian direction.
Yeah. One thing you talk about in the article, Phil, is the strategic goals and the argument that Trump may have more clear strategic goals than Biden. And I'm just wondering, how does that manifest itself? Because it seems to me that, as you're saying, I'm not sure what Trump's goals here, and I follow this pretty closely. It sounds like he's willing to cede some territory in order to get a peace deal. That may be one difference, but is that a fair view of what he's doing, or what are his strategic goals?
In the Oval Office yesterday, he says that his goal is everlasting peace. And that's the hyperbole from Donald Trump that we've come to expect. But if we back up for a moment and compare what this administration is trying to do by negotiating with both Ukraine and Russia, something that Biden didn't do. If we look at sort of their overtures to this being limited assistance, not a blank check, I think that the picture becomes a bit more clear, because Biden, by comparison, he didn't talk to the Russians. And by comparison, he was always saying nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, to signal that this was very much an open-ended, alliance. I remember asking the Biden White House during the early days of this conflict, what is their definition of victory? And Jen Psaki said, well, it's difficult to define. because it's up to the Ukrainians. How do they want to end this war? Eventually, though, you had Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, say, more than a year into the conflict, that the goal was to strengthen the Ukrainian hand on the battlefield so that you could strengthen them at the negotiation table, so that they could preserve the territorial integrity of Ukraine. That's kind of similar to what we're hearing from the Trump administration: strengthen the Ukrainians on the battlefield so that they can get Putin to the peace deal. The difference is, I don't think that this administration is as beholden to the idea of Ukrainian territorial integrity, like you mentioned. But I just want to go back to JD Vance. I know I'm meandering here, but his office was very particular when they explained what he was for. And they noted that he not only supports this plan, but the reason that he does is because it is a way to not fund the conflict indefinitely, but protect taxpayer dollars. And there's a specific goal, which is forcing Putin to the table. Some Biden folks and some of the more anti-interventionists conservatives might say, all right, well, that's a distinction without a difference. The new is the same as the old.
Carl?
Well, it's easy to say that Donald Trump has sort of an ad hoc foreign policy. That he personalizes his relationships with foreign leaders more so than some previous presidents have done. He came into office the first time with no foreign policy experience whatsoever. We didn't know if he was a conservative or on foreign policy, or a hawk or a dove, whatever that means. And he had been a Republican and a Democrat, a Reform Party person in the decade before, and he rarely talked about foreign policy. But he was president before. He knew this thing was happening. He kept saying he would end it, but it turned out he didn't have much of a plan. His plan was that his personality, his personality is so strong, he would be able to convince both these leaders to stop fighting, that it was in their interest, and that hasn't worked. But it's a reactive job. You're dealing with these problems. He didn't expect to be derailed by Hamas. He didn't see that coming. And George W. Bush, when he was president, his foreign policy, he wanted to pay attention to Mexico. That was the country he cared about. Suddenly he's fighting, we're attacked in 9/11, and then he's a wartime president. So in this case, I think Trump's attention was diverted from Ukraine and Russia by what's going on in the Middle East, but he seems that he's back on track now. And I tend to think it's naive that a president can use his personality just to solve long-running disputes. I'm pulling for him. I mean, the Russians do have a reason to want to end this war. They're losing all these people and they're not winning. And Ukraine wants to keep the country. You can imagine a deal. It just hasn't come together yet because of Vladimir Putin. And I think Trump thinks these sanctions will force Putin's hand.
All right. Well, guys, we're going to have to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've been talking with Phil Wegman, who's got an article on the front page of RCP today. You should check it out. And Carl Cannon's here with me. But don't go away. We'll be back with more right after these words.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevin, co-founder and president of RCP. Joined now by Karrin Taylor Robson. She is the Republican candidate for governor of Arizona. Karrin, thanks for joining me. Appreciate your time.
Tom, thank you for having me.
So you ran for this office last time around, and you're giving it another go. And I wonder, first of all, how's the campaign going thus far? And what takeaways did you have from the experience last time around? What have you learned, and how are things maybe a little different this time?
Well, things are a lot different. This time I have President Trump's complete and total endorsement, which is a game changer. I'm proud to have it. And, he knows that I will have his back. He knows that I supported him in 2016 and 2020 and 2024. And he knows Arizona is a red state. And with the right candidate, we will win. And we will take the governor's office back from the radical Katie Hobbs. But in the last, I learned a lot in the first campaign. I was a newbie in the political arena, and crisscrossed this state, met a lot of people, and have a lot of friends now that I didn't have before in the first campaign. And so we're gonna build off of that. I did 44 events just last month in June, and we're still over a year away from the Arizona primary. So things are much, much different, and we feel good. Every room we go into, we're picking up support, and people like what they're hearing.
Now, you mentioned the endorsement. So Andy Biggs, Congressman Andy Biggs, got in this race and also received Trump's endorsement, which is kind of a unique situation to have dual endorsement here. And it looks like from the latest poll that I saw, which was Noble Predictive Insights at the end of May, that you're leading by about 7 points, but 37% of Republicans in that poll were undecided. And so what's the differentiation point between you and Congressman Biggs, and how are you going to win over a majority of those 37% who are currently weighing their options?
Yeah, well, first, President Trump has done dual endorsements in other races. In fact, he did a dual endorsement here in Arizona in 24. But the key to being successful is to be able to appeal to the Trump independents. President Trump won Arizona by nearly 6 points in 2024. And, the next Republican on the ticket in Arizona lost by 3. So there was a 9-point swing. And so it is critical for the nominee to be able to appeal to those Trump independents. And I am that candidate. Bill Buckley, who I was a fan of, said, the party needs to nominate the most conservative candidate who can win a general election. And I am that candidate.
And so tell me about Arizona. What are the issues that are driving this race, obviously in the primary, but also in the general election? And how are they any different from what we're seeing at the national level? Or there's issues that are specific to Arizona that people are really in your ear about as you travel the state?
Well, there are a few specific issues, but generally the issues that Americans are concerned about are the issues that Arizonans are concerned about. The border in particular, border safety and security, local law enforcement. People want law and order. And, if we can't get that right, nothing else matters. And President Trump has done a phenomenal job of shutting down the border. When I ran last time, every visit to the border was, you just saw what looked like a landfill and busloads of illegals crossing the border into the waiting arms of the Border Patrol. The times I've been down there this cycle, just in the last couple months, it's literally crickets. There is nothing going on at the border. President Trump didn't need a new law. He didn't need anything. He needed the leadership and the will to do it, and he did it. But I will continue to have his back as he continues to keep our border safe and secure. And I think that's on the top of everybody's mind in this country. Also, and President Trump has illustrated this and exposed this, I should say, is the waste, fraud, and abuse in government today is rampant. And it's not just happening at the federal level, it's happening at the state level. And the voters of Arizona are concerned about that. And so day one, when I'm governor, we will also have a governor's DOGE effort. And I will lead that, and we will root out the waste, fraud, and abuse in the system. So that's critically important. And then education. Of course, we have decades of DEI, Marxist indoctrination that made its way into the bowels of our education system. And while we've made some strides to get rid of it, that is going to be a focus of mine. We have to get rid of the Marxist indoctrination of our school kids. We also have to do a better job of educational outcomes. And people on the campaign trail have heard me talk a lot about third grade reading, which is a key indicator of someone's success in life. And as a country, we're failing there. And the state of Arizona is failing in that regard, and we're going to fix that. And the voters of Arizona, the parents of Arizona, they care about these things, and those are the kitchen table items that I'm going to be focused on. And then, of course, our economy. Coming from a business background, I know what it takes, to make an economy tick, and having a low tax, low regulatory environment is key to that. We have a tremendous affordability problem in Arizona, and somebody with a legal and real estate background, I know something about how to deliver, housing to a market that desperately needs it. And our governor is, she essentially created a growth moratorium, a housing moratorium, at a time when affordability is a critical concern of Arizona families. So that's what we'll be focusing on, border security and the safety of our communities, getting rid of DEI in our schools, third grade reading, and then, of course, the economy and making life better for Arizona families.
You mentioned your background. So this is you haven't held public office before, but you were part of appointed to the Board of Regents by former Governor Doug Ducey, and your background as a lawyer. I mean, how do you think those experiences will translate into being the chief executive of the entire state?
Well, I've gotten a lot of experience and a lot of perspective on things from education to the economy. You know, I currently serve on the Creighton University Board of Trustees. I serve on the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. So I have a bird's eye view into the issues that are plaguing higher education today and what it takes to fix them. I also served on a K-12 school board when my kids were going through school. So I have a lot of passion for education issues, and then a lot of expertise, like I said, on the economy and what do you need to do to get the economy going? And number one is get government out of the way, cut taxes, cut regulations whenever and wherever possible, just like President Trump is doing at the federal level. You know, as a business person, he knows how to get things done. You know, he signed both sides of paychecks. He built budgets and managed budgets. That's what I've done, and that's what I will bring to the job as a chief executive officer of the state of Arizona.
You mentioned, I mean, this is a state that, had Republican leadership for a long time with John McCain. I mentioned Doug Ducey, and it had sort of gone blue a little bit, and Trump sort of won it back by a sizable margin in 2024. And yet, you've got a Ruben Gallego as senator and obviously Katie Hobbs. So what is assuming you win the nomination, you're in a general election setting, what's the brief against Katie Hobbs? What's the argument for why voters should kick her out and put you in?
Well, I believe, Arizona is a red state. It's a conservative state. It doesn't look like that on paper right now, but candidates matter. And back to my earlier quote of Bill Buckley, as Republicans, we have to nominate the most conservative candidate that can win in a general election. In Arizona, our electorate is divided somewhat evenly, a third, a third, a third. The Republicans have a little bit of an edge, but you have to be able to appeal to the Trump independents, or you're not going to win a general election in Arizona. And that's the key to this, is appealing to a broader base of support, just like President Trump did in 2024. So he proved it could be done. And so I plan to do the same thing and appeal to not only conservative Republicans, but the Trump independents.
Well, but what about Katie Hobbs? I mean, what has she done wrong? I mean, what are your lines of attack on her? Why do you think voters, if they are, I don't even know what her approval rating is. I did see in the latest polls, she's getting about 40 to 41% support. So what's the problem with Katie Hobbs?
Well, that would take about an hour.
How much time do we have? Okay.
Yeah, but just to highlight a few, in fact, a report just came out. Arizona under Governor Ducey was #1 in the nation for job growth. Report that just came out has us now at 47th in the country. We had a net job loss last year alone under her watch. She created this growth moratorium, and so our affordability issues for Arizona families are going through the roof. People cannot afford a house. And why she did what she did is inexplicable, and we will fix that. She's under investigation by her own party, the attorney general of her own party, for corruption, for pay-to-play schemes. And so the list goes on and on. Even a member of her administration was caught for human smuggling, wearing a state uniform, smuggling humans across the Mexican border. I mean, it's unacceptable, the things that have gone on under her leadership or failure of leadership. She has vetoed over 400 bills. She ran on a platform of being a bipartisan governor. She's been anything but that. This year alone, she vetoed 150 bills sent to her by our Republican legislature.
Well, we've got to leave it there. We're out of time. Karrin Taylor Robson, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. Stay safe on the campaign trail.
Thank you, Tom.
And that's going to do it for us. On behalf of Andy and Carl, I'm Tom Bevin, co-founder and president of RCP. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. Everybody have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.